In the year 2000, Jane Dorotik's life took an unexpected and horrific turn as she faced accusations of her husband's murder. Jane Dorotik, a 53-year-old woman from Valley Center, California, was just an ordinary woman until that fateful day in February. That's when her life took a sharp, tragic turn. Jane reported her husband Bob missing on the evening of Sunday, February 13th. She had last seen him that afternoon. He'd gone out for a jog and never returned. Early the following morning, Bob's lifeless body was found several miles from their home. He had been brutally bludgeoned in the head and strangled, a grisly discovery that sent shockwaves through the peaceful community. It was obvious to me that it was a homicide, Sheriff's Detective Rick Empson would later tell the press. Upon examining the scene, investigators quickly determined that Bob Dorotik wasn't killed where his body was found. There simply wasn't enough blood. So where did this horrifying act take place? The answer, it seemed, lay closer to home than anyone could have imagined. When the Dorotiks' home was searched, spots of blood were found all over the bedroom. Jane tried to explain the blood. She said Bob had had a recent nosebleed, and they had dogs who had bled, but authorities dismissed her explanations. There was no question in our mind that this assault occurred in the master bedroom, Empson stated. Just 3 days after Bob's body was found, Jane found herself in handcuffs, arrested for the murder of her husband. Despite the cloud of suspicion hanging over her, Jane maintained her innocence, even inviting the 48 Hours crew into her home later that year. "It felt like a nightmare and I kept saying, 'When am I going to wake up?'" she told correspondent Erin Moriarty. But there was no waking up from this nightmare. The wheels of justice were already in motion. And so Jane found herself under the crushing weight of suspicion, her life rapidly spiraling out of control. The investigators were convinced that the Dorotiks' bedroom painted a sinister picture. Their eyes fell upon spots of blood splattered in an eerie pattern across the room. Bob Dorotik, husband and father, had been found bludgeoned and strangled by the side of the road, miles away from their home. Yet, the investigators were certain that the real crime scene was right here, in the bedroom of the Dorotiks' Valley Center home. Jane Dorotik, Bob's wife, had reported him missing the previous evening. She had last seen him heading out for his routine jog, never to return. Upon discovering the blood spots in their bedroom, Jane had a simple explanation. Bob had recently suffered a nosebleed, she said, and their dogs too had bled in the room. But the authorities were skeptical. The blood wasn't just in one place. It was all over. On the comforter, the pillow sham, the wall behind the bed, even on the ceiling. They argued that the amount of blood in the bedroom was inconsistent with a simple nosebleed or a pet injury. "It was obvious to me that it was a homicide," shared Sheriff's Detective Rick Empson. The investigators were certain that Bob hadn't been killed where his body was found. There simply wasn't enough blood at the roadside. "There was no question in our mind that this assault occurred in the master bedroom," Empson stated with grim certainty. What followed was swift and startling. Just 3 days after Bob's body was discovered, Jane Dorotik, a seemingly ordinary woman of 53, was arrested. The charge? The brutal murder of her own husband. The investigators believed that Jane had struck Bob in the head and strangled him in their bedroom. Afterwards, they theorized, she had dressed him in his jogging suit, loaded his body into their truck, and discarded him by the roadside. Jane Dorotik, a 53-year-old woman, found herself in handcuffs, accused of a crime she vehemently denied. The nightmare had only just begun for Jane Dorotik, and the road ahead was long and uncertain. As the trial commenced in May 2001, the prosecution presented a chilling narrative of the crime. The courtroom was filled with an eerie silence as the prosecutor, Bonnie Howard Regan, began to paint a detailed picture of the scene. She described a blood-soaked bedroom as the catalyst for a murderous plot, alluding to 20 locations where investigators had found splatters of blood. "There was blood on the comforter, there was blood on the pillow sham, on the wall behind the bed, on the ceiling above the bed," she said, her words echoing through the hushed courtroom. The prosecution's theory was as startling as it was grim. They suggested that Jane Dorotik, in a calculated act of violence, had bludgeoned her husband Bob in their own bedroom, then strangled him. After this brutal assault, she allegedly dressed him in his jogging suit, loaded his lifeless body into their truck, and discarded him along the side of the road like so much unwanted refuse. Howard Regan punctuated this grim narrative by telling the jurors about a large bloodstain found on the underside of the mattress. The evidence will show that all this blood that has been described to you, the observations made in this bedroom, that it was all sent out for DNA analysis, and it all came back Bob Dorotik's blood, she told the jury, a statement that sent a chill through the room. The jury, faced with the weight of this evidence and the gruesome tale spun by the prosecution, deliberated for 4 days. 4 days of weighing the facts, of considering the blood-stained bedroom and the lifeless body found on the side of the road. 4 days of wrestling with the image of Jane Dorotik, a woman of 53 years, as a cold-blooded murderer. In the end, the jury returned with a verdict that would forever change the course of Jane Dorotik's life. She was found guilty of the brutal murder of her husband, guilty of a crime that had shocked their quiet California community. The judge presiding over the case delivered her sentence, a chilling pronouncement that echoed through the courtroom. 25 years to life. Jane Dorotik was found guilty and sentenced to 25 years to life, a verdict that sent shockwaves through her life. As the gavel fell, sealing her fate, so too did the curtain fall on a chapter of Jane Dorotik's life, leaving her to face a future shadowed by bars and defined by a crime she insisted she did not commit. In prison, Jane Dorotik found herself grappling with a harsh reality, but she was not ready to give up. Life behind bars was a far cry from the life she once knew. Each day was a struggle for survival, a test of resilience, but Jane was not one to surrender. She clung onto hope, onto the belief in her innocence, onto the pursuit of truth and justice. For years, she tirelessly campaigned for a fresh examination of the evidence. She submitted motion after motion, each one echoing her plea for justice, but every time her appeals fell on deaf ears. Motion after motion was denied, each rejection a harsh blow to her fight for freedom. Despite these setbacks, Jane remained steadfast. She maintained that the authorities had tunnel vision from the beginning of the investigation, focusing solely on her while neglecting to follow other leads. She argued that the truth was still out there, obscured by a flawed investigation. As the years rolled on, her plight caught the attention of a group of dedicated individuals. The Loyola Project for the Innocent, a team committed to rectifying wrongful convictions, decided to take on Jane's case. They saw in her struggle a fight for justice that mirrored their mission. This team began to dig deeper into the evidence presented at the trial. They scrutinized the bedroom blood evidence that the prosecutor claimed was fully tested and belonged to Bob Dorotik. Their findings were startling to say the least. According to the appeal, not every single spot in the bedroom that was believed to be blood was tested. Instead, representative samples were tested. This revelation was a significant development in Jane's fight for justice. It suggested that the prosecution's case may not have been as watertight as it appeared. The Loyola team discovered that several stains, which were believed to be blood on items like a pillow sham, the nightstand, and a lampshade, turned out not to be blood. This finding undermined the prosecution's claim that the crime scene was saturated with Bob Dorotik's blood. Despite the odds, Jane Dorotik was determined to fight for her innocence. Her spirit remained unbroken, her resolve unwavering. And with the Loyola Project for the Innocent on her side, Jane's fight for justice was far from over. The Loyola Project for the Innocent team took a closer look at the evidence, and what they found was startling. The team took on the Herculean task of revisiting the blood evidence from Jane's bedroom, the very evidence that had been the prosecution's primary weapon. The prosecution had claimed that every spot of blood in the bedroom had been tested and confirmed to be Bob Dorotik's. However, the Loyola team discovered a different narrative. It appeared that not every single spot believed to be blood was tested. Instead, only representative samples were analyzed. The team found that several stains, initially described as blood, were not blood at all. These included stains on a pillow sham, the nightstand, and a lampshade. This revelation was a direct contradiction to the prosecution's claims during the trial. Furthermore, the Loyola team identified inconsistencies in the prosecution's narrative. Jane was accused of bludgeoning her husband in their bedroom, dressing him in his jogging suit, and disposing of his body by the roadside. But the evidence didn't completely support this theory. The team also questioned why the authorities focused on Jane from the onset of the investigation, seemingly failing to follow other leads. It was as if a tunnel vision had been adopted, and Jane had been pegged as the primary suspect from the get-go. The impact of these findings on Jane's case was monumental. They presented a fresh perspective on the evidence and challenged the prosecution's narrative. They also raised questions about the investigative process and whether Jane had been prematurely targeted as the perpetrator. The Loyola team's findings were a beacon of hope for Jane, who had spent years behind bars pleading for a new examination of the evidence. They were a testament to her unwavering belief in her innocence and her relentless fight for justice. The re-examination of the evidence wasn't just about identifying inconsistencies in the blood samples or the prosecution's narrative. It was about seeking truth and justice, about challenging assumptions, and about giving Jane a fair chance to fight her case. The new findings by the Loyola Project for the Innocent team cast a shadow of doubt on the case against Jane Dorotik. Jane Dorotik's case raises serious questions about the justice system and its handling of criminal investigations. It peels back the curtain on a sobering reality: the potential for wrongful convictions. Jane, a woman who was living her life like any other, found herself in the crosshairs of an investigation that seemed to have already decided her fate, even before all the evidence had been examined. This case underscores the importance of thorough investigations that leave no stone unturned. The narrative spun around Jane was cemented by blood evidence found in her bedroom. Yet years later, it comes to light that not all the spots believed to be blood were indeed tested. This revelation alone casts a shadow of doubt on the conclusions drawn by the original investigation. In the pursuit of justice, it is not just about finding someone to blame, it's about finding the truth. And yet, Jane Dorotik's case seems to highlight a troubling trend where the rush to close a case can sometimes eclipse the pursuit of truth. Jane's story is a chilling reminder of the weight that every piece of evidence carries and the profound impact it can have on a person's life. It's a call to action for law enforcement and the justice system as a whole to ensure that investigations are comprehensive, unbiased, and transparent. Her case also sheds light on the tenacity of the human spirit in the face of adversity. Despite the odds stacked against her, Jane continues to fight for her freedom, proving that the pursuit of truth should never be abandoned, even when the world seems to have turned its back. However, it's important to remember that every case is unique, just as every individual is unique. Jane's story isn't meant to indict the entire justice system, but rather to encourage a more meticulous approach to investigations, an approach that prioritizes truth above all else. As Jane Dorotik continues to fight for her freedom, her case serves as a stark reminder of the fallibility of the justice system and the importance of relentless pursuit of truth.